and that's it. So, welcome everybody. I'm actually here with Professor Edmondson, Amy Edmondson. She is a renowned professor, the Novartis Professor of Management Leadership at the Harvard Business School. She studied failure her whole life. For a long time anyways, and there was a bit of a happenstance in terms of how she discovered to study failure and the research stream that she's in. So I have a couple of questions I'm going to ask. I only have 3 questions. First of all, thank you, Amy, for showing up here. I'm absolutely delighted that you're here.
My pleasure.
And here are these 3 questions. So the first one is how do we encourage the pursuit of projects that have a high chance of failure in academia? And I don't know if you have any experience with this.
I sure do.
All right. So,
okay, sorry.
Okay, I'll keep quiet and
Okay. I think the best way to answer that question is to start with basic science, or to start with the realm of the bench scientists in chemistry and biology and physics and so forth, who are, in labs around the world trying to pursue game-changing discoveries. And if that's your goal, or to be a leading scientist, is to publish papers that are really new ground. And in order to do that, you have to, of course, keep up with the literature. You have to be aware of what we know and what we don't know. And you have to put together thoughtful hypotheses. But if you're on the leading edge of any scientific field, the chances are very good that your thoughtful hypotheses will be wrong, that your experiments in your lab will end in failure. And you have to be okay with that, because each of those failures is a small stepping stone on the path toward success, on the path toward discovery. So if we then back off from that more extreme context, at least for most of us, most of us don't do a job where the majority of the things we try will end in failure, but rather where a minority of the things we try will end in failure. And so maybe that gives us less practice, less experience with failure. So we have to pause to remind ourselves and our colleagues that if we want to make progress in new territory, whatever that means in your realm, whether that's an innovation project or a new skill you want to pick up, you must be willing to get it wrong on the way to innovation improvement, skill development. And so just remind yourself, this is part of the program. So kind of sort of reframing the context that failure is simply a disappointment, but not a catastrophe. And relatedly, keep them small. Right? If you're not quite sure that something will work, don't bet everything you have on it. Don't make it be your only activity for this year. Keep your failures small and smart is kind of the key insight there. And I think when we start having this new language around failure, and we understand the difference between a smart failure or an intelligent failure, which is the undesired result of a thoughtful foray into new territory, not, a stupid, preventable failure that we could have prevented if we had been paying attention. Like, once we make those distinctions, I think we're better able to take risks.
Now, do you have examples of something like this that you can help with the audience?
Sure, I have many examples. So I started with the example of a scientist in a lab with an experiment, and the experiment ends in failure. But I can also just as easily say, how about a blind date? Let's say you have a friend who has a friend and they really believe, and you're looking for a life partner or a relationship, and you trust this friend, you like this friend, and they have good reason to believe that you might get along well with this person. And so you agree to go out for a coffee, right? And maybe it doesn't go well. So that's an intelligent failure. It's new territory. You couldn't have known in advance whether it would fail or succeed. You had good reason to believe it was a worthwhile trial. It's a worthwhile date. worthwhile use of your time. And it's in pursuit of a goal that you have, which is to be in a relationship. And the failure is quite small, right? You didn't expend excessive time, money, energy on it. You agreed to have a coffee. So that's an intelligent failure. And if you keep, I think anyone who has engaged in dating to find a life partner, has had some, or most of us, not everybody, but has had some failures along the way, right? So you understand and tolerate the false steps on the way to finding that success. Companies, of course, are full of innovation projects in the pharmaceutical sector. They are required, fortunately, to do clinical trials to prove both the safety and then the efficacy of the new treatment. And many of those trials end in failure. The prediction was good, the science was good, but for whatever unpredictable reason in advance, it didn't work, right? So again, intelligent failure points us in the direction of what to try next.
Okay, this is lovely because this leads to my next question, and that is how do you not internalize projects that do not go as planned?
Even how do you not take it personally or feel bad? Well,
and as well as speak openly.
Yes, and that's I think that's a very important question on both. How do you speak to yourself, and then how do you speak to others? And in chapter 5 of Right Kind of Wrong, which is my book about failure, a healthy relationship with failure, chapter 5 is the title is We've Met the Enemy, right? And it is us, right? And part of our problem, part of what holds us back in life is faulty thinking. It's so that we think, maybe consciously, maybe not, that if I have a failure or something goes wrong, it means I'm incompetent or I'm worthless or I'm never going to amount to anything. When of course that's just not true. The most successful people are those who have had more failures, not fewer. Whether they're athletes or scientists or chefs, you name it, right? There have been the people who are willing to experiment, the willing to play to win, to go for it, right? So that what I describe in there is that there's a self-discipline, which I'll call stop, challenge, choose. And stop simply means take a breath, pause. Pause to interrupt the unhelpful thinking, the unhealthy thinking that naturally is triggered when you have a disappointment or failure of any kind. And challenge means take a look at your thinking and challenge it, right? Is this thinking helping me get to where I'm trying to go? Right? Is it helpful? Is it healthy? Is it in fact rational and factual? And the answer is usually no, right? You're saying to yourself things like, "Oh, this is awful. I'm never going to be able to say to my friends again," or whatever you're saying to yourself. It's generally untrue, right? And certainly unhelpful. So you take a look at, and then you challenge your own thinking and choose more healthy thinking. Like, here's an example. Like, well, this was disappointing, but it taught me something useful, and I'm eager to get back on the project and try something slightly different that might work out better.
So it's fascinating because you pointed out that it's rational to not beat yourself up, but it's almost that it is very rational, particularly in the culture that we have.
Right? Natural, but not rational. Because by rational, I mean something based in scientific fact and logical premise that it's actually helping you get where you're trying to go. That's what rational. It's as fact based and sort of strategic as possible. But it is natural. It is human. It is culturally incredibly normal, but it's not rational.
So I find it's interesting because the way that I often I have one more question, but the way that I deal with a lot of this is to view myself as completely non-rational, where I'm viewing a lot of what we actually do as play and not looking at it from a strategic lens. As trained in strategy that we had, we're supposed to have this sort of target, and we're narrowed in on that target. And if things don't go as planned, then we beat ourselves up for doing that. So I have to often view this as, this is akin to playing or being silly or, just goofing around.
No. I think we have different meanings of what rational is all about, because I think if you live and work in an uncertain, complex, interdependent world, which you do, then it is rational it's irrational to expect things always to line up according to plan. Like to have a strategy, have a plan, and everything's going to just unfold as I expect, right? Wrong. That's irrational in an uncertain world. So if you live in a predictable world, as a simpler world, then that's a good fit. But for me, the uncertain, complex, ambiguous world in which we live makes it rational to be okay with the disappointments, the missteps, and rational indeed, as you put it, to play. And to kind of say, yeah, let's give it a try. Let's see what happens in the safest possible way. Behind closed doors or in the lab or in the simulator, in places where it is no one's going to get harmed, physically or economically beyond what they can tolerate. Then let's have a little fun. Have fun experimenting when the stakes are low.
So it's really fascinating when you're suggesting that having low stakes is important for learning, and that's from what I gather is that's what you were building your original research on.
Yes.
So simulating research, right?
And then being able to ensure lower stakes, right? Because let's say the stakes are high, like you're in space travel or you're taking care of patients. The stakes are high, but you want to do your experimenting kind of offline in a careful way so you deliberately force the stakes to be low so that you can learn. Sorry.
But there was always something, though, that you found was completely different, or there was something you found was completely different in that low stakes environment, and then you put it into the real world. You start looking at what are really people doing, and we find this completely different view, right? You found that speaking up was very difficult, and
right. That's a great point. That's a great example. Like, for example, in a work environment, let's say a factory, or let's say a hospital, or an executive boardroom. It is rational to want and to invite people to speak up honestly and openly. And yet the data are clear. That's not what they do most of the time. Right? Most of the time they wait and see. They speak up, they speak up openly when they're confident that it will be well received, but they don't take what I call interpersonal risks unless there's been hard work to kind of establish a climate where interpersonal risks are expected and acceptable. And it's kind of irrational, right? It's irrational to hold back. Like if I have an idea, that could help the team. If I need help, that could help me and the team. But if I fail to ask, that's pretty irrational in the long term. It might feel rational in the moment because it feels safe and easy in the moment to hold back, but it will come back to haunt me.
So it's fascinating because how do you get us to do this on a regular basis? There was, in your book, you were talking about the contrast between two advisors. One was a lot more discerning, and then the other one, I think, was Richard Hackman. That was very encouraging to pursue.
Oh, right.
And it was really fascinating from my perspective in terms of how do we get people to build on things, ideas that don't seem to work at the beginning, and accept them that this is the way that the world actually is.
Well, there's no single answer to how do we get people to see things differently. But I think it's a little bit like sales, where initially, I mean, the first barrier to them seeing things differently is they don't have a relationship with you, right? So there's no real reason to trust you. Why should I trust or listen to you? Why are you bringing something to me, a perspective to me that might be of value to me? So in many ways, the first thing that has to happen is a connection, that like a sense that like, who are you? Oh, you've got some nice expertise, like, and you're a well-meaning person. And so, all right, now I'm listening. Right now, I've overcome the trust hurdle. But the next hurdle is that I actually think the status quo is fine, right? I'm just fine. Like I don't particularly perceive a problem. So that you now have to describe, maybe with a vision, that the opportunity, like that there is something better forward that we could, that we could try. I mean, we could, if we thought of the world as more uncertain, we might make more progress in iterating toward the future. And then it's sort of, okay, that's compelling. I can see that. But then there's okay, but I don't really want to deal with it today. I'm busy. So and then you have this opportunity to kind of build a little urgency. Well, here's what I see at stake or at risk if we do nothing, or if we just kind of continue with the status quo. So there's probably different ways to think about, how do you engage people in seeing things differently? And I think the short answer is inquiry, not advocacy, right? Don't try to kind of convince, which means to conquer, right? Don't try to convince them that your view is right. Instead, use inquiry to invite them to reflect on their own experiences and see, right? This could be different.
I love that, because my view of the world is all about play and being goofy and being silly and sort of just asking questions, because it often destigmatizes a lot of the emotions that we often feel, particularly when we're looking at data that isn't just quite so, right? We keep looking at that, we read these theories, read many different theories, and then we look at the real world and we realize,
right, they don't fit, they don't match.
They're not. So how do you reconcile that in your head is an important part of being a good researcher, a good scientist, and good academic, of that curiosity of reckoning. That isn't an anomaly. That's not an outlier. Actually, the way that the world actually is.
Right. I think we have to lean into curiosity. I mean, we have to choose curiosity. We have to choose it actively, because our default state is a state of knowing, like I see reality. No, you don't. You see reality filtered through your expertise, your bias, your background, all the rest. And so you have to sort of actively override your sense that you know and choose to learn.
That's very powerful to say it that way. Because often that's my experience is you have to shed so much.
Yeah, it's true. What do I need to let go of, right? And that's the number one question.
Absolutely. Your identity, everything that you know about yourself, there is so much that goes on.
Right. And it's not that you're 100% wrong. It's just that there's a little window to expand your sense of your identity or your sense of the world, right? It's not that you have to abandon everything you know and start all over. It's just that you have to be open. You always have to come into any situation thinking, I have a valid point of view and I'm missing something. Because then selfishly, I want to fill in that gap. Right now I want to know what you know that I don't. Right. So now I'm really all ears.
Absolutely. And it's almost like a waltz, right? Where you come into the situation leading and following at the exact same time. And feeling so how do you, this is my third question. I don't want to keep you too long. That was my deal. It was just to be really quick. how do we spread a culture of psychological safety? Well, first of all, I guess we haven't talked about what is psychological.
That's true. The psychological safety is a belief that the environment is safe for interpersonal risks, or more precisely, for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, and even mistakes. Not that it's easy, but that you believe it's expected and valued around here, often because of what's at stake, right? Because we really care about the quality of the work. And so that's what psychological safety is. How do you build it? I think it's very simple, not easy, but simple. Means you call attention to uncertainty. You make frequent reference to things like, we might miss something. Really, we all need to sort of share our worries, share our observations, share our wild ideas, the crazy ideas that you might think are stupid, but share them, right? So it's like you sort of say, because of what we do here, we need all this input. We're at risk if we don't get it. Number two, you proactively invite input, which is what you're doing right here. You're asking questions. Because when you ask me a question, I promise you, it would feel incredibly awkward, bordering on impossible to just sit here and not say something. And then once you've asked a question, you've you reverse the calculus from like, well, you're always better off if you hold back and wait and see, to, well, that's awkward, right? He's just asked me a question. I can't sit here quiet. I have to say something. I could say I don't know. That's a fine answer. But instead, if I do have thoughts, you've just invited them. I'm going to share them. So lean into inquiry. And the third thing you need to do, and everybody needs to do to encourage psychological safety, is make speaking up a positive experience. It doesn't mean that anything goes. It doesn't mean that everything anyone says is useful. It isn't. But it means when someone, say, admits a mistake, you say, thank you so much for letting me know, right? You don't say, oh, isn't that wonderful? Right, because it isn't. That would be like inauthentic. Mm-hmm. You say, thanks for sharing that. How can I help? Right, so you make it a positive experience and keep your eye forward always. I think we automatically look backward, like, how did that happen? But instead, it's, what next? Where do we go from here? How can I help? Always important to do the after-action review, to thoughtfully figure out what went wrong and why, but that doesn't need to be your first reaction. The first reaction ought to be forward-facing.
I love that idea of how can I help?
How can I help?
That's honestly, that's a little bit of my motto.
Yeah, I love that.
I love it. No, it strikes true in a lot of things that you're saying, is that in the world that we live in, Jim March, I've heard famously said that the academic market is not rational in the short term. In the long term, it may be more rational. So we have to realize a lot of things that we actually do are complicated.
Right.
And if you're working on hard, interesting, amazing problems, you may not get the answer ever.
Right. Or maybe years. And that's okay.
And that's okay. And how do you, I think that's the another thing that's super important, at least for me, is just to keep repeating in my head, like, I'm okay. Doing fine. Right. That's okay.
Right. I think so too. And I think that's rational, honestly. Like, it's just, you are okay. You're a bundle of cells with thoughts and emotions and friends and lives, and it's okay, right? There are many disappointments, there are many setbacks, but deep down, you're okay. And you can choose learning. You can choose forward motion.
I love that. And that's all I'm going to ask for you today. And
thank you.
Relatively short. And if you want to join again, you're welcome to.
Yeah. I will recommend that you reach out to Jen Heemstra, who's at Washington University. She's just written, and it's not out yet, but I've read the manuscript, a book about being a great, how to be a great leader in academia. And it's so good. And I'm sure you'd enjoy talking with her.
I would love that. I will look her up. So she's at Washington.
I think she's at WashU, and she was at Emory, but I think she's at WashU now.
I was going to actually mention her name because I read your book. Yeah.
Right. And since then she's moved. But yeah, so you know how to spell it because it's in the book.
Beautiful. Just that encouragement of failure repeatedly. I think
You're going to fail all day.
I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Professor Edmondson.
Amy, please. You're welcome.
This was an absolute delight. And if you ever want to reach out again, you know where I am.
Okay.
Yeah, this was
all right. Thanks, David.
So thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.